I'm one of the minority CTOs that didn't come through computer science. And yes, we are out there. Give me a wave in the chat if you're the same. So I feel the next topic quite acutely. I often feel like an imposter, usually when looking for my next role, or sometimes day to day, trying to ingest a long technical report from one of my principal engineers. To help us navigate this topic on imposter syndrome, what it means for us, and how to deal with it in your teams, I'd like to introduce Matt Squirrell, Head of Development at iTech Media.
Thanks, Lee John. Hello, everyone. Like you said, I'm Matt Squirrell. I'm Head of Development for iTech Media, and it's my job to make sure the devs at iTech have everything they need to work to the best of their ability and to provide an environment which makes them actually want to do that. I do this via a team of engineering managers, some of whom have turned up to watch tonight. I'd like to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen to me this evening, and I'd like to thank CTO Craft for giving me the opportunity to speak with you all. There are some incredible names on the roster for this event, and I don't feel I deserve to be on the same list. And that's because I'm affected by imposter syndrome. Studies come up with varying results when trying to judge how many people are affected, but the range is from around 55 to 75%. That's 55 to 75% of all the people working today. You don't need me to tell you that's a huge number. Even if there are only 2 people in your organization, chances are that imposter syndrome will be having an effect in that workplace. So, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to you about it, how you can recognize it, and how you can help people who are affected, whether that's yourself or a member of your team. First, let's quickly cover off what imposter syndrome is. If you searched for it on Google a couple of months ago, you'd have gotten some good information, but now everything is about the Among Us game, so we'll go through some things here. If you take a look at the quote, "I don't feel I deserve to be on the same list," it's fairly easy to boil that down to its base meaning: I'm not as good as other people. People with imposter syndrome feel like they just don't belong, like they've lucked into a position and they're surrounded by folk far better at the job than they are. This manifests itself in various ugly ways. They may work themselves to the point of exhaustion every week, or they may shy away from career growth, set themselves impossible goals. They'll almost certainly be less likely to ask for help and also struggle to admit their weaknesses or their mistakes to other people. They will be really hard on themselves, though. Don't worry about that. And they will be stressed. Like any mental syndrome, individuals are affected to varying degrees and in different ways, but the feelings of anxiety and stress are common across all of them. And while everyone is getting fed up of hearing it, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that lockdown is making this worse. Being separated from colleagues in the office environment make it easier for negative feelings to manifest. With fewer real voices to drown it out, the little voice in your head telling you that you aren't good enough gets louder and louder. So, how can we as leaders help? Well, first off, you need to recognize when people are affected. And we'll start with the most important person in any team, yourself. While studies vary about how many people are affected, they're all fairly aligned on how many people with imposter syndrome actually realize they're affected. It's around 25%. And there are some wonderful surveys and flowcharts to help people to self-diagnose, but we've not got much time today, so I'll go with the most common symptoms people feel. Do you worry you'll be found out? Do you think your colleagues are largely better at their jobs than you are at yours? Do you think your success is down to outside factors, like good contacts or luck? Do you feel uncomfortable when receiving positive feedback? Do you feel that praise is just people trying to be nice, or even because they're trying to hide something? Are you far harder on yourself than anyone else is when you make a mistake? Do you believe that your work should be flawless? That's not striving for perfection. That's a good trait to have. I mean, truly believe that your work needs to be flawless. Do you panic when you don't know something? Do you feel you have to figure everything out on your own? Those are all common symptoms of someone affected by imposter syndrome. If you answered yes to 2 or 3 or all of those questions, maybe you are too. I'm not here to diagnose you, so have a chat with a counselor, mental health first aider, a career coach, or any other suitable service you have access to. And if it turns out you are affected, welcome to the club. Most people are in it, so don't feel too bad. But how do you recognize it in your teams? Well, the biggest thing you can do is something you're doing already. And if it isn't, then it should be. I don't need to tell you how important it is to build trust in your teams. We've just had a whole other topic about it discussed tonight. Giving someone a safe space to talk means that when you ask questions similar to the ones that I just asked you, you'll get honest answers. But who should you ask? I'm afraid step one is to do a little bit of profiling. Studies show that the more diverse members of your team are considerably more likely to be affected by imposter syndrome. Subconsciously feeling like an outsider in your working environment can pour fuel on the idea that you don't belong, which is the root cause of the anxiety. But actually recognizing the signs can be tough. Imposter syndrome is complex and manifests in many different ways. It might cause someone to seem constantly tired or anxious or dissatisfied with their work. They may appear to lack motivation, or conversely, they may seem hyper-focused, working as hard as they can to make sure you see their worth. Commonality here is a poor work-life balance, as individuals work long hours to get things done or take their anxieties about work performance into their social lives. Other things to look out for include using self-deprecating language, often in a jokey way, or they may be a high performer who does fantastic work tidying up the tech debt or optimizing something deep in the bowels of the monolith that still powers 80% of your tech platform, but who shies away from high-profile projects because they don't want to be noticed. Or a person that doesn't put their hand up for promotions despite being more than capable. A person that compares themselves unfavorably to peers when giving feedback about themselves, or a person uncomfortable with seeking feedback from anyone else. Now, you may be thinking, that just sounds like a lot of people I work with, and you're probably right. It's a lot of people that you work with. It's potentially 2/3 of people that you work with. And those of you that are handy with math already worked out that it's more likely people are going to be affected by imposter syndrome than they're not. You're probably also realizing that syndrome is tricky to pin down. But there is some good news. Different symptoms tend to group together, and there are three main identities that stand out. And we're going to take a look at those right now. So the first is the perfectionist. A perfectionist sets huge goals for themselves and then experiences anxiety about missing them and major self-doubt when they inevitably do. They feel they have to be right 100% of the time and have the attitude of, if I want something done correctly, I have to do it myself. Next up is the superhero. They want to do everything and they want to do it alone. They're desperate to prove their worth, and this is how they think they can do it. They're the people that answer the questions on Slack first, whether or not it's anything to do with their job, and they're unable to turn down a request for assistance. And they work long hours due to this in an attempt to get everything done. This one is me. Hi. Third is the genius. The genius believes that they need to be a natural at something. They strive to demonstrate how easy it is for them to do tasks and how quickly they can do them. They might talk about how many emails they get each night, believing this somehow validates their employment. And they don't like taking feedback, as they feel they should already know everything you could possibly have to tell them. So, if you think you've identified some people in your team who may be affected by imposter syndrome, how can you help them? Well, let me start by telling you what I've been doing for the past few years. I anthropomorphize. I knew I should have put that word in. I anthropomorphize everything. My cars, my computers, even my vacuum cleaners have been given names over the years, and I talk to them too. Mostly in the case of my cars, I shout at them. Since I learned about my imposter, I named him Carl, and it's Carl who speaks to me and causes me to doubt myself. And like the aliens from the movie, Carl mostly comes out at night, so he was affecting the amount of sleep I got too. The first step for me was understanding what imposter syndrome is and how it affected me. As I said, I fit firmly into the superhero group. I want to do everything by myself, and I find it very difficult to turn people down when they ask for anything, and I find it difficult to ask others for help. While I see myself as someone who manages to get by, I see everyone around me as a massive success and very skilled in what they're doing. Not really helped by the fact that yesterday my cousin sold his chat app to Salesforce. But I probably shouldn't dwell on that for too long. Realizing that this is a known documented syndrome has been a massive help. For years, I'd been alone with these thoughts, which made them so much easier to believe. Reading things about myself that were so accurate for my personal situation was a literally life-changing experience, and it may well be so for anyone you're able to coach through the same thing. Interestingly, as soon as I made Carl into his own separate personality, I found it much easier to deal with him, as now I could argue and tell him to shut up. In my head, obviously, I don't sit around in the office doing an impression of Gollum. Hey, moving on. Helping others. Obviously, the great first step is education. Self-awareness is key to understanding. Ask your colleague if they're aware of the symptoms and ask them to do some research if they're not, or if they've never considered that it might apply to them. Reassure them it's a really common thing, and perhaps take the time to give them some key things to focus on when their own call comes calling. Why you chose to hire them in the first place? What makes them a useful member of the team? If they think that everyone else in the company would actually not notice if they were truly out of their depth. And use data. Anything you can back up with cold, hard numbers is gold to anyone affected by imposter syndrome, especially if they're a technical person. There's no arguing with facts, so make sure to back up any feedback, positive or otherwise, with evidence where possible. Work with them to set realistic goals. They may worry that this is a sign you don't think they can do the work. Reassure them where possible. Show them the goals that other members of the team have so they can see how they compare. And above all, recognize them. Give them the validation they're desperately trying to give themselves. Once they understand more about the syndrome, ask them what they would gain if they could snap their fingers and have all of this go away. Set targets that start to take them outside of their comfort zone. Of course, in some situations, this may involve reducing the amount of work they currently do. Be wary of that because this will still take them out of their comfort zone. And also be prepared to speak up on their behalf to some, let's call them traditional business people. To some, the idea of an employee who works harder than everyone else but has low self-esteem and doesn't ever ask for a raise sounds like a dream come true. I've had bosses in the past that would be injecting people with imposter syndrome if they could, but assure these people that helping the sufferers in your company to combat this is a long-term win, and perhaps drop a subtle hint that it's also the right thing to do if you're not a fucking monster. If that doesn't work, come and work with me at iTech. Bring your whole team with you. It would be great. In the blurb for this talk, I mentioned that you could use imposter syndrome to your advantage because I believe that having dealt with it for much of my life, it has had some positive effects. For example, I felt like I spent a lot of my life out of my depth. And as a result, when I was actually out of my depth due to being dropped into a new product suddenly, or maybe asked to deliver something outside of my normal skill set, I found I was able to do so with relative ease. And whenever I was fortunate enough to take the next step in my career, whether it's a promotion or starting a whole new job, the nerves were something I could recognize. Carl would pipe up and tell me that I wasn't good enough, but I'd heard all that before. I could answer him. I could say, yeah, right, that's what you tell me every day. Shut up, Carl. I have to mention this excellent book by Dr. Young, but the title is so long it would have taken up most of my time tonight, so you can grab the link from this deck afterward if you're interested in learning more. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll be hanging around in the Slack channel for an hour or so.